Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and today I'm going to be doing a wave painting demo using the Mungyo Gallery Soft Pastels. These are their artist line of handmade pastels, and I'm going to be using colors found in their 30-piece collection. I'm going to be focusing on the blues, their cool greens, and the grays and blacks, and the white. Those are the main colors I'm going to be using. My reference photo was found on pixabay.com. Pixabay is a great place to look for reference photos. If you don't have any, you can use them without fear of copyright claims. I'm just using a dark blue pastel pencil to sketch out the basic shapes of the waves. You can sketch this using just your general soft pastels. I prefer sketching with a pastel pencil. It's just easier for me, but you use whatever tools you have. And I'm just roughly sketching them in. And the reason why I chose a dark blue is because it will blend into the other colors I'm layering on top. So I'm not going to have to worry about covering anything I did. The paper I'm using is pastel matte paper in a dark charcoal gray color. And it's in a sketchbook that I made a few years ago. Once the basic shapes were blocked in, then I could start coming in with my soft pastels to start laying down the base colors. I'm not being too fussy with what colors there are. I'm just trying to build up the base layers of color. One thing you'll notice is that since this paper is darker, some of the values are going to pop out a lot more and seem more vibrant because the colors next to them are so dark. It's also going to make my darks not seem as dark. If I used these same dark pastels on a white piece of paper, they would appear a lot darker than what they appear on here initially. That's because the contrast between those colors or the values of those colors isn't as extreme. So black and white is your most extreme contrast that you can get. So if you put a dark, almost black pastel on white paper, it's going to be almost as extreme as you can get. Whereas the dark pastels are only a few value steps darker than the value of this gray paper. I hope that makes sense. It's probably clear as mud. Anyways, you're getting kind of an opposite effect as if you were working on white paper. So when you're working on white paper, your white and light pastels don't really stand out that much until you get other values that darken the paper around it. Whereas with this, since the paper is already dark and toned, the light colors are popping out, and it makes it really fun. And that's part of why I chose this darker paper to work on, was to really help the vibrancy and the lightness of like the white pastels and the pale blue ones really stand out against it without having to do tons and tons of layers. So just something fun to keep in mind. This is also why some artists choose to work on like a mid-toned paper. So they don't go super dark, but they don't go on pure white unless it's watercolor. They choose something that's more mid-tone. That way they can get those whites to pop out quicker, and they don't have to work as hard to get the darks dark. It just makes it easier to kind of work from the middle and reach both ends of the value spectrum. As I've been laying down kind of the base layer of the colors, I've been making sure my strokes kind of match the direction. So I talked about the horizontal strokes and blending in the background, but you can see now I'm starting to curve them to match what the wave's doing. So the water that is going up into the wave is curving up, and then the water that's kind of curving over the top I've curved it down. And I'm trying to make sure my blending matches that, and that's going to help give dimension and shape and depth to these waves. As I've been laying down the colors, I've also kept an eye on what colors I was laying in what area of the painting. So I want that background water to kind of recede back. I don't want it to be the focus. And so I made those a lot darker, more muted tones. There's just a little bit of color variation to kind of help give the idea that there's water back there and there's a little bit of light reflecting on it. Then the next wave, which is the wave that's further back from us, it's starting to come up. It's not as big. It's not the main focus. So I'm not making it be as vibrant. I'm not having it be as light in value or have as high of contrast. I'm just putting in the implications of like the colors and the light shining through it, but I'm not focusing on that. I want the main focus to be on this front wave. And so I'm making that area the brightest. I'm making it have the most saturation and color, all those different things to help draw attention to it. And that's actually how it is in the reference photo. And you can see that value gradation in that reference photo of from dark to light as it comes towards you. And this is just something that I will continue to kind of keep in mind as I'm painting this and as I refine the details. And I just wanted you to be aware of so that you could see that process and know what I'm thinking as I'm working. I did this painting as part of my demo for my review on the Mungyo Soft Pastels. And because it was a review, I only used the pastels that came in this set of 30. That limited what colors I could choose to layer. And I didn't do an underpainting because I really wanted to show off these pastels to give people a better idea of how well they worked. Since I didn't have an underpainting that was colorful and I was only working on a gray toned paper and I only had a small selection of pastels to choose from, I had to get really creative with how I layered the colors. This was a great exercise for me to remember how much I can create with just a limited supply of pastels. It can be really tempting to buy more supplies in the effort of making ourselves better artists. So we might think, oh, if I just have this color or this paint or this brand of supply, I'll be able to be a better artist. And sometimes that's true to a certain extent. If you have better supplies that will work with you better, then you can actually do more with them. But getting more doesn't always mean you're going to become a better artist. You're going to become a better artist from using the supplies you have. It's kind of like that workout saying, the best workout is the one that you're actually going to do. The best art supplies are the ones that you're actually going to use. I know it can be kind of frustrating or disappointing, and you can feel feelings of almost inadequacy when you see other people's big art room tours and they have all these supplies at their fingertips, and you just have just a small collection, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it can feel like yours isn't enough. And that's something with social media in general, is that it can make what you would have been happy with in the past feel inadequate and make you feel unhappy with it. I want you guys to know that you can create amazing artwork with just simple supplies. You don't have to spend a ton of money on buying big fancy collections of supplies. You don't have to have a ton of them. Sometimes that can be almost overwhelming. The best art supplies are the ones that you're actually going to use and use regularly. Because when you're using your art supplies regularly, you are beginning to understand them. You understand how they layer up. You understand how they interact with other colors, how they blend, all these different things. You become more acquainted with them. And then you're able to push the boundaries of them and see what you're able to achieve. You're able to learn and grow as an artist. And then when you get new art supplies, you can add them to your collection and you can continue to push the boundaries. But the most important thing is that you use the supplies you have. Don't be so focused on getting new and more supplies. Focus on utilizing what you have, and then when you can afford new ones, get them. This reminds me a lot of Eddie Van Halen and an interview I watched with him. Someone had asked him how he developed his iconic sound. And he talked about how when he was a kid and he had his guitar, he really wanted these different pedals and different things that made distorted sounds on the guitar. But he couldn't afford those. They were way too expensive. And so what he did was experiment with ways to play the guitar that mimicked those sounds. And because he did that, he ended up learning the guitar in a new way and kind of pushing the boundaries in ways that people hadn't seen before. And that is kind of what you're doing with your art supplies when you are learning how to maximize the supplies you have. You're becoming the Eddie Van Halen of your art. You are learning to push the boundaries and developing your skill more than if you had all the supplies on hand that you could ever want. And if you're feeling in a creative rut, sometimes setting up arbitrary rules for yourself for a project can help you get out of that rut. So whether it's saying you can only use specific colors or a specific set for this piece, or you say, I can only paint with my non-dominant hand. I recently did a gouache painting where I could only paint with flat-headed paintbrushes, and I had to do a specific type of stroke to create that painting. Those different things can help challenge you and help get those creative juices flowing, because then you have to do a lot of problem solving as you work on that project. And now that my TED Talk is over, let's get back to what's going on in the picture, shall we? So I'm using a blending tool that's called like a blending stump. It's just paper that's been tightly rolled together and made into fine points on the end. And I really liked it for blending the small details in this piece. I could blend them and still control what areas were getting blended and what areas were not. And then once that was all blended out, I sprayed it with workable fixative, which just kind of adheres that bottom layer of pastel down so it can't move or blend as much with the layers above it. Once that was dried, I started coming in and doing a little bit more detail on the waves. So I added some more color down, and then I came in with this light blue, and I'm blocking in the ocean spray area of it, not the drink, but the white mist that's coming off of these waves. And the reason why I'm using this light blue, especially on that back wave, is because I don't want it to be as bright as the spray that's going to be coming off of the front wave, which, since it's closer to us, is going to be more white. The further things are away from us, the more gray and dull they get. So I purposely made that back wave have more of a blue gray tone in their highlights than the front wave. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I made sure all the highlights on the crest of the wave matched the curve of it so that it was feeding into it, and it helped really make it look dimensional. I made the sea foam in the left-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner of the picture, look like it's feeding up into the wave, so it kind of curves up and into that wave. With this periwinkle color I'm using, you can see that I've bounced it all over the picture. I used it as the highlight in the background, like waves and bumps in the water. I used it as kind of the gray tones in the sea foam in the left-hand bottom corner of the picture. And with me bouncing it around all over the picture, it's creating more harmony. You don't want a color just showing up in one specific spot in your painting, because it will stand out and it won't look like it belongs. By bouncing that color around in different areas of your painting, or using it as part of your mixes for other colors, it's going to make it look like it belongs, and it's going to create a more harmonious effect to your piece. This is why in art you see a lot of artists talk about their color palette, and some artists are very specific about what color palettes they use, so what colors they use when they're painting. This is so that they can create a specific look or feel to their painting, and it makes them look more harmonious, and it makes their whole series of pictures look like they belong together, even if the subject of those pieces is vastly different. Now, I'm not saying you have to consciously come up with a certain color theory for why you're painting your piece a certain way, but limiting your palette and bouncing those colors around will make it look like everything belongs, and it will create a more unified painting. That's why you can see that I've bounced like the periwinkle color in the background to be the highlights, and then I've brought it down into more of the foreground to be some of the more gray tones of the seafoam. By bouncing those colors around, I'm making it look like it all belongs together. At this stage in the painting, you can see I'm keeping a pretty light hand with what I'm doing. I'm not laying down big heavy areas of color. I'm doing more lines and layering up a whole bunch of colors together and then blending them out gently. This is because I'm starting to focus more and more on the detail of this piece. I've already done the big block in layers of color, and now I'm trying to refine it, and I'm adding a little bit more detail, and I'm adjusting and tweaking as necessary, and I'm not pushing hard because I don't want to fill in the tooth of the paper. I want to be able to do a lot of layers. And actually, when I was done with this painting, I could have done quite a few more layers over the top because I kept such a light hand. It was at this stage of the painting that I was really looking at my reference photo and seeing what needed to be tweaked. And the light blues and the darker greens were looking good, but I found that it was pulling a little bit too gray blue and it wasn't pulling enough teal. So I started using this lime green color, and there's not lime green in the waves, but once it was blended out with the other colors, helped pull it to a more teal turquoise color than what it was looking like with just the pale blues. And that's an example of what I mean by how layering your colors and blending them can help you achieve new colors. So here's a cool technique I don't think I've shown before on my channel. So what you do is you lay your picture flat and you take a pastel stick and you take something with kind of a sharp edge. So I'm just using scissors, and you gently scrape the thing with the sharp edge across your pastels, and it will make this dust, and the dust will fall onto your picture, and it will create this random speckly pattern that you could use for like snow or stars, or in my case, mist. And it's really great for creating these textures that are hard to create through traditional like stippling or dotting methods. You can control how far it spreads out or how close it is together by how close your pastel is to the paper. Once you're happy with it, take a piece of paper and push that pastel dust in. Make sure you don't skip this step because you don't want all of your work to fall off the paper as soon as you lift it off. So make sure you press that pastel dust in before you move on to the other layers of your piece. And at this stage of the painting, I am just looking at what things need to be fine-tuned and tweaked. I'm not really looking at my reference photo as much. I'm looking at this painting and seeing what it individually needs. After looking at my reference photo, I decided some things needed to have more contrast, so I'm coming in with a teal and just adding one, a darker color, and then two, I'm leaving some more sharp details in this to really help them stand out. Things that are more in focus are going to have sharper details, while things that are in a softer focus without as much detail recede visually. And so the areas I want to stand out, I'm making sure they have more detail. I'm also reinforcing some more of that mist / spray areas with the scissors to really help those pop out. I love how alive it makes the picture come. And I just decided I needed a few more shadows in the foreground to really allow that turquoise to pop and to stand out on its own. And I'm just fine-tuning these details. If you are having a hard time knowing what needs to be tweaked or adjusted, take a break from your picture and then come back to it, and then you can know how to best adjust it. I'm doing one last press to get all of that pastel dust stuck into the paper. And then I'm just doing a little bit of blending to soften up the edges of areas that I don't want to be as noticeable. And that is the end of this painting. I hope you found this demo helpful. I shared some of the footage from this piece in my Mungyo Soft Pastel review, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth and explain some of the techniques I was using because they are ones that I haven't used on this channel very often. If you have any questions or comments about it, please leave them down below. If you liked this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more of what I create, please hit the subscribe button and notification bell. It really, really helps me out. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time.